All right, on to our program. Pauline Heckler is an 11-year member, nonprofit consultant, and she's going to set the stage for the program today. Pauline?
Thank you, President Phil. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Bear with me while I give each of our presenters just a minute of introduction. It's my honor today to introduce three people who will be working on this program on open primaries. Speaking for open primaries is Paul Johnson. This is Paul. Paul's an Arizona native and most remembered for his service as mayor of Phoenix from 1990 to 94 after serving 4 years on the city council. He's known for his work on education, the environment, crime, and children's issues. As mayor, he brought about the nation's first kids' gun law, the curfew program, and a 90-acre park at the Indian school site. He averted a major transit strike and helped America West Airlines through bankruptcy. Under his leadership, Phoenix was voted best run city in the world. Paul ran twice for Arizona governor in 1994 and 98, and today is a proud independent voter. He's a busy entrepreneur and leader of open and honest elections, a reform movement dedicated to creating fair and competitive elections for all Arizonans. Speaking against open primaries today is Bill Risner. Bill graduated from Catalina High School in 1961, the University of Arizona Business School in 1965. That's Bill over there. The law school at the U of A in 1968, and he attended graduate business school at the U of A until 1969. He practices at Risner and Graham, where he focuses on personal injury and wrongful death law. Throughout his career, Bill has been an active member of the Pima County Democratic Party. Bill successfully handled a redistricting case for the Democratic Party against the city of Tucson in 1971. He was president of the Tucson Community Development and Design Center for many years and has represented many community groups on environmental and planning issues. He says, quote, "I've been fortunate to have avoided being elected to office in spite of my candidacy, including a race for Pima County Attorney in 1976, end quote. And our distinguished moderator today is the Honorable Jim Colby. Well, probably a lot of you know Jim. Jim currently serves as a senior transatlantic fellow for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. In addition to his work with GMF, Jim serves on the board of counselors for McLarty Associates and is president of JTK Consulting. Locally, Jim serves on the boards of directors for the Community Food Bank. It's been 30 years he's been on that board. And Critical Path Institute as co-chair of the Governor's Transportation and Trade Task Force and on the Council on Foreign Relations. For 22 years, Jim served in the U.S. House of Representatives as our congressman. Prior to Congress, he served 6 years in the Arizona State Senate. Jim was commissioned in the United States Naval Reserves in '65 and gave a year of service in the Republic of Vietnam. He retired after 10 years as lieutenant commander. Jim graduated from Northwestern University with a bachelor's degree in political science and from Stanford University with an MBA. Accompanying Paul Johnson today are Patrick McWhorter, Arizona Campaign Director of Open Primaries. Patrick, would you stand? Thank you. And the President and Vice President of the National Open Primaries, John Opdyke and Jeremy Gruber, who are also here from New York City. And accompanying Bill Risner is filmmaker John Brakey, who has kindly offered a free copy of the raw footage taken today to the club and all participants. Thank you, John. And now I'm going to turn the program over to our moderator, the Honorable Jim Colby. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. It's great to be back in this room with the Rotary. It's been a long time. It's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say, to be back with all of you here. Our time is limited, so let's get right to it here. You've heard the biographies of our two very distinguished panelists here today, and with long records of public service here in the state of Arizona, so I don't need to go into that again. But everybody seems to agree that our political system is broken. People have different prescriptions of how it might be fixed, but seems to be near universal agreement that it isn't working very well today. Perhaps one bit of evidence that confirms this point of view is to be found in the annual Freedom of the World report, which comes from the distinguished independent group Freedom House, founded by Eleanor Roosevelt some 70 years ago. For the first time ever this year, the report will give the United States a downward arrow, marking a decline in the state of freedom in this country. They place this discouraging marker on the United States mainly because of the gridlock in the political process and in the legislative process, which they attribute in very large part to the congressional redistricting process. This process encourages the packing of Republicans and Democrats in separate districts, thus making them less competitive. The same can be said of state legislative district. The result is a polarization of political ideologies. Extremists on either side of the political spectrum populate the legislative arena, while moderates or centrists have very little voice in the political arena. What can be done to correct this distortion in the legislative arena? One suggestion is open primaries, allowing voters of both parties where the top two vote getters of whatever political party end up on the November general election ballot. So in an overwhelmingly Republican district, one candidate might well choose to appeal with centrist proposals, hoping to attract enough Democrat and independent views to garner the second spot on the November ballot. The reverse would be equally true in a solid Democrat district. The idea is already being tried in some states, notably in California, next to us. And you'll have this opportunity to vote on this as a similar change in the Arizona Constitution this fall. So with us today, to discuss the pros and cons of the idea, are the two gentlemen on the platform with me today. Each will have 10 minutes here to make their case. Following that, we're going to take questions from each of you as long as time permits. Each speaker will have 1 minute to respond to the questions that are asked, and the other will try to direct your question. You can direct your question to one or to both gentlemen, and we'll try to alternate the responses. So as is customary in the debate, the proponent of the proposition that we should have an open primary shall go first. Paul Johnson.
They always put these things too low. Everybody hear me back there? All right, great. Well, first I'd like to thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about what we're doing. I'd also like to thank Jim for being the moderator. When I went into politics, Jim was a congressman and certainly an icon for Arizona. Also, his brother I used to hike with weekly. He was a columnist for the Arizona Republic, and he probably had a greater influence over my political thinking than anyone else I can think of at the time. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip the what. I mean, the what's really, we can go into detail on it, but the what is that we're equalizing the playing field for independents, because today they're discriminated against both independent voters as well as independent candidates. Second, we stop the political subsidy that's going to the political party. Third, we change the way the election system works. And fourth, our two initiatives that we're going to announce tomorrow require that you disclose dark money. Now, that's the what. Let me talk about the why. And instead of, I want to be very careful not to insult anyone else, any other elected officials, because I have a high degree of respect for them. And I certainly don't want to in any way harm or say anything bad about Bill, because I know he's a much better debater than I am. Here's what I want to do. I want to discourage myself. What I want to tell you about is that after I left the mayor's office, I was in a nonpartisan government in Phoenix. I ran in a 3-to-1 Republican district in the year of Ronald Reagan as a Democrat. I'm an independent today. But I won by knocking on doors and because it was a nonpartisan election. When you knock on that many Republican doors, you hear from a lot of business people. And it had an influence over how I thought. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I then became mayor. And as mayor at the time, it was mainly a Republican city. I then decided to run for governor. I always like to say I wanted to run for governor in the worst possible way, which was what I did. I lost. And many of you are too young to remember that run. But when I ran, I announced and I said, here are the two things I want to focus on: economic development and education. Now, I'm going to tell you up front, I was totally unprepared for a partisan race. Totally unprepared for it. But I got this great article by a guy named George Will on a national level who talked about, this was really a new Democrat. He was talking about how to solve economic problems by empowering business, by trying to reduce regulations, by trying to ensure that you could that you didn't overtax them. And so this article got us great coverage, and we came back to our table, mostly of which were Democrats, and they said, good job, now let's go do the same thing in education. So go back and think about what you would do and bring us back a plan. So I thought about it, and the truth was I didn't really know the state educational system, but I did know Phoenix's. And in Phoenix's, there were a lot of Hispanic districts, poor districts. In fact, a number of districts where the odds were, if your kids went to school in that district, you had a 70% chance that they wouldn't graduate. Now, as I sat down, I wasn't a supporter of vouchers. I thought that vouchers was the wrong idea. But I did know this, that when you looked at the system, we had to take accountability for these kids who were failing. So I came up with an answer, and I'm not trying to advocate this answer to you, but I do want you to pay attention to one thing in this story that's important. I believed in this answer. Here's what it was. Declare them bankrupt. Declare that the board has failed, the teachers have failed, the teachers' contract has failed, the mayor's failed, the governor's failed, the legislature's failed, the parents have failed. When 70% of the kids aren't graduating, we're all failing. I said, let's contract it out. Let's let school districts that are public school districts bid on it, and let's let private groups bid on it. Figure out who we want, give them 3 years. If they don't fix the problem, fire them and go to another one. Now, I was so excited about this plan. I brought it back, put it in front of my staff, and it wasn't received the same way that I thought that it was. So in any event, I start going through it, we're fighting, and finally my pollster, a really good pollster named Linda Lake, said, Mayor, please don't poll this, or please don't advance this till you let me poll it. So I said, okay. So I made her poll a general and a primary. Now here's the good news about the general. I actually picked up a lot of votes in the general election on that idea. Here's the bad news in the primary. I couldn't have won dog catcher with it. Right? That was just a fact. So I'd love to tell you it didn't matter, but it did. The failure was mine. I wanted to win, just like every other candidate does. And so the idea never saw the light of day. Now let me give you some numbers so you can think about this system that we have today. Here are the numbers. 70% of the people are registered to vote. About 40% in this country are independent. About 30% are Democrat and Republican. So do the math. 30 times 70% means about 20% of the people could vote in either one of those two primaries. However, turnout in a primary election as opposed to a general is dramatically lower. Only about 20% of the people show up, maybe 25. So now you're talking about 4% of the public will vote in the Republican primary and 4% in the Democratic primary. Now here's where it really gets bad. When they win that primary, in the United States Congress today, out of 435 congressmen, only 35 of them have real competition in the general election. The other 400 are determined in those primaries. You will find the better congressmen, in my opinion, and Jim I thought was an example of that, in the competitive districts tend to speak to a much larger audience. But the rest of them, they're serviced by not getting along, by appealing to extremes. And now you add dark money on that, and it is a dramatic game changer. So look at how it's working today. When you look at me, I kind of argue whether I should have been first. We shouldn't be arguing whether my idea is right. We should be arguing whether the status quo is working. And most people believe that it is not. It is failing us in education, immigration, our federal deficits. The ability to bring people together is increasingly becoming more difficult. And you can take this to the bank. As we add dark money to this problem, it's going to get a lot worse. A lot worse. And so we come down to saying this. We need to show we can make this republic work. Benjamin Franklin, when he was walking out, we all know his line when the woman said, "So what is it, sir, a monarchy or a republic?" He said, "Well, it's a republic if you can keep it." It is a mistake to believe that freedom is a universal value. You look at when the Roman Republic fell apart. It took almost 1,776 years before the first republic and the first democracy was put back together on this planet. It can fall apart. People can begin to fall into their corners. I'm here because I believe we can make it better. That, in the end, has to be what this is really about. It's about restoring faith in people, that we can make our government work and that it can be accountable to the people. With that, thank you very much, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much. I would say I agree with huge chunks of what was said in terms of the situation being not good in this country. And it is because of the, one of the major things is the influence of money on elections. But in terms of a debate, it's a little bit interesting because he didn't say anything about his plan as what to do. He didn't say anything about how that would change anything. In fact, they haven't put their plan out, so we can't read this. One of the things that was mentioned was dark money. That didn't sound good. But what the United States Supreme Court has said is that money is speech. The United States Supreme Court says corporations are people. Corporations can spend as much money, individuals can spend as much money, and in fact, the news says that the Koch brothers plan to raise and have them and their friends spend $900 million on this election cycle, which is more than national political parties. Mr. Adelson over in Vegas, they have what they called in the press the Adelson primary, where he had candidates fly to him to talk about who we would support. So certainly the corrosive effect of money is a huge problem, but I'd like to see the plan that that can get around that use of money. I've seen in this state, we've tried, you know, we have rules on independent campaigns, but that's, it's child's play to get around that stuff. You know, we have, for instance, in Tucson, we have, let's say for city council, mayor, they can run and just get some public money for the campaign. What happens on every single campaign is, okay, we're going to run, and you will have Joe and Tom and our friends here will set up an independent committee. And you have, I remember when Bob Walkup ran, it was sort of an amusing thing. Someone brought me the independent brochure and his campaign brochure, same identical photograph on both. And in fact, what any candidate can do in Tucson or anywhere in the state under these rules is the candidate can say, well, I've got all my money to comply with you know, clean elections, but here's some envelopes and give money to the independent campaign. He could raise money for the independent campaign. It's simple to get around it, and given the rules of the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't know what plan they're going to have, and he hasn't told what the plan is to get around it, but that's a tough nut. But one of the things that does limit in some respects is, frankly, political parties. Because, you know, one of the things that I do for a living as a trial lawyer, we go to a jury, and I've learned that a group decision I like a lot better if I can get them the right information. If I've got a single judge Then you sit back and say, what's this judge's background, what's his tendencies, what they do, the bum, bum, bum. You know, it's a whole different program. And the proposal is that the top two plan that everybody runs in a primary, and then the top two go to the general election. And that's so what you're doing is enhancing the ability of money, because all those candidates have to get information out. There was a study I saw of how this proposal worked in California, and I'd like to read a few sentences from the conclusion. This was three scientists from the University of California in Berkeley in their political science department. It says the intent of open primaries is to counter growing polarization among representatives, and thus potentially to improve democratic accountability. Yet, in the case examined here, no such improvement occurred. For significant change to develop, reformers must have to go beyond the rules to find a way to substantially increase voters' information. In fact, by increasing voters' options without increasing information, the experiment suggests that the top two ballot led to slightly worse voting decisions. Voters chose candidates ideologically further from themselves under the top two format than with the closed ballot system. Since most voters are moderate, this means they chose more extreme candidates on average. At least with the political parties, you have precinct committee people, they have county committees, they develop a platform, you talk about issues, you can look at the campaigns. People know that certain political parties tend to go one way on an issue, another way, and those who are concerned about the primaries can go and vote and choose the people for that is more like them in terms of the issues that they want. You heard problems about the problem's money. You heard problems about information, and it's very hard to get information out. I was a candidate in 1976 for the county attorney. I went down to the Arizona Daily Star late in the race. I said, here's a check, your rates, here's X dollars for a half-page ad. And here's my ad. Guy says, we won't take your check. I said, well, what's the problem? The check's good, I can get cash. He said, no, we won't run this ad. I said, what's the problem with the ad? It's a good ad, but we're for the other guy. We're not gonna take your money, and we're not gonna run your stuff. That's the way it is. You know, you wanna get your message out, buy your own newspaper. You wanna go on television, buy your ad. So can you imagine a situation where you've got 6, 8 people run, as many you run? It's a piece of cake. The big money guys, oh, we're worried about these candidates. We'll flood with a few extra candidates here and there. We'll manipulate the system. The system of having everybody on one primary makes it more expensive, because in the primary you have to pay for the whole electorate, whoever might show up. So it costs more money to get your information out. And how do you get that information to people, that solid information? You know, how do you keep the wolf in sheep's clothing that's got the big boys behind them? And one of the interesting things here is this is a big boy proposal. You know, the treasurer's the largest lobbyist firm in the state of Arizona. They're talking about spending, I think I saw $13 million on this campaign, and $5 million already pledged. Who's coming up with that kind of money? Who benefits from that? I looked at the Secretary of State's website and how much was spent in campaigns in the past. You know, you see maybe a few $100,000 on a statewide campaign, $1 million or $2 million. This kind of money is huge. And yet they're talking about that money's the problem. We need to see the details. This is a wolf's in sheep clothing plan.
we have 25 minutes. I'm gonna change the format just a little bit here. Give each of them a couple of minutes just to rebut the comments the others have made, the other person has made here. So, Paul, let you give rebuttal. You can do it either from there or come up here. Why don't you come here?
Well, let me just hit a couple of points that I think are important. Here's the first one. You like the status quo, all right? Because talk about not hearing an answer. What we heard was that all the problems that we talked about are right, but what we ought to do is just leave it like it is. Just leave it alone. I have to tell you, I face elected officials who say that every day. Elected officials who win under the current system say to me, competition costs more money. Well, duh. Competition costs more money. Candidates will spend more money. But I can tell you, the dark money issue is going to do a lot more to advance the spending in politics than is whether or not you have real competition in a race. That's just a fact. Second, you can compare it to California if you want. I'll give you two other places to compare it to. Here's one, Nebraska. They've had it for 70 years. Overwhelmingly, the Nebraska legislature has about a 70% popularity. The governor, who's elected on a statewide basis, is much less popular, who's elected on a partisan basis. In Arizona, our legislature is very unpopular. It has about a 20% popularity. But most cities that are elected, in fact, every city in Arizona that's elected on a nonpartisan basis ends up running in about the 50s and 60 percentile. You don't have to go far to see how this works. All right? Every city except for Tucson in Arizona has a system that works this way. You run in a general election, that's what you do, and then the top two vote getters go to the next level. I did that as mayor 2 elections, I did that as a council member as 2 elections, and I will tell you something else. As a Democrat, I won in a 3-to-1 Republican district. How? Because it didn't matter as much. Because when you're talking to people individually, look, this group can find lots of consensus amongst Democrats and Republicans. But you couldn't if you were elected in a partisan system. Because then there's an incentive to not agree and to not get along. Our dark money effort, it's not that complex. Here's what it says. You have to disclose. Now, I'm a little bit of a libertarian on this, so I will tell you, here's my opinion. You ought to have the right, when you make money and earn money, to spend it any way you want. But the rest of us ought to have a right to know that you're spending it when it's spent on politics. I can go through the details of that effort, but nonetheless, that's what it does.
Thank you. Bill. You want to answer all to that? We can go straight to questions if you don't have any response. You want to give us a rebuttal? Rebuttal is the rebuttal. On the dark money, maybe?
Well, you know, if you look nationally and you look at the last election, all of the tens of millions of dollars and the money that came in from other states and the money that was spent in Arizona, all of that can still happen. What we haven't heard today is how this can be done that passes constitutional muster. You know, they can write something down, but it has to work in terms of this state. It has to work in terms of committees that run ads and do other things in this state. And I want to see the details, because I don't think it can be done. It's a terrorizing thing to read that Citizens United case and see what our Supreme Court has said. But they're the ones that make the rules on top, and that's and I don't think they'll be able to get around those rules.
Thank you, Bill. All right. Excuse me. It's your turn. We want to have questions. Are we going to line up someplace? Is that the idea?
Back here.
Back there, and
Clear.
have you got a microphone back there?
No, we don't.
No, you don't. They can pass one back and forth up here. We'll take one back there. While we're getting people back there to ask questions, I'll start with one myself to each of them. Paul, let me first ask you this. And this came up a little bit in the discussion here. Bill raised it here. It said to me that one of the problems we have today is the super PACs and the independent campaigns. And as a result, political parties have been shorn of a lot of their influence and ability to pose any kind of discipline on candidates. Doesn't the idea of an open primary just accelerate the decline of political parties?
Not in places where it's been implemented. Political parties are going to exist because special interests and groups get together and they want to be able to advance their voice in a party. I can tell you, the city of Phoenix, political parties played a role. They played a role in the elections of people. The difference is that they didn't dominate the system, and the candidates knew that they had to go appeal to a wide variety of different people. But here's also what's happening, Jim, I know you know this. The independents today, they're the majority. They make up the majority of the voters today in Arizona and nationally. And so what you're saying to them is, hey, for you to participate, you have to help subsidize these primaries, but we now have parties saying you can't take part in them. And by the way, the United States Supreme Court has said that they have the right to do that. Well, effectively, you're disenfranchising that whole group of people. By the way, the poll in Arizona said that 30% of the people who are in both parties today plan on leaving them to become an independent. Almost everything we're seeing says there's a disassociation going on with them. But what that's doing is it's leaving a more concentrated, ideological voter inside those primaries that are driving the candidates in each direction.
Bill?
Yeah, you know, the reason that people are not are disillusioned with the system, you know, is because of the money and the influence of the big boys. There was a study done, I think this was from Columbia, but it, you know, University Columbia. But what they found was when the public, when large percentage want a certain thing, it doesn't matter if the big money and the big boys don't want it. You can't get it. 75% may want, a huge number may want a single payer plan, whatever the issue is that they want. The only time that happens is when a segment of the 1%, the top elite, want it. If a chunk of them want it and a whole bunch of the public want it, they get it. Otherwise, they don't. So it's true that that there's a lot of problems with the system, but it's based on the control of the big money and the big corporations and the wealth that pushes in one direction. The only thing that counters that really is the organized political parties that have platforms and push and discuss these things. That works against that. And this proposals favor money and her political party.
Bill, a question for you. Then, if open primaries isn't the answer, did I hear correctly from you, the only thing that can be done is really to overturn the United decision? What would you do to try to get more competition into the system?
Well, you know, there may be stuff that can be done that the state can do in terms even of the big money and identifying where it comes from. I have no, I don't know what the proposal of these folks is. They're just, they say, we got a proposal somewhere and we'll tell you about it later. I'm saying it's a very difficult thing. Otherwise, I don't know. That's it.
Response to that?
Well, I would start by saying it's just a fallacy to believe that the parties are your protection against big money. I have to tell you, big money owns the parties. There's just no doubt about it. By the way, it's much easier to do so. In smaller groups, you don't have to spend as much. When you have an open election where candidates have to go out and meet people who don't necessarily agree with them, you get a better result. I ran at 23 years old for the city council. I will tell you, I was probably a liberal Democrat when I first ran. All right, I didn't know what was happening. I just knew I wanted to win, and I was knocking on doors, and I kept knocking on Republican doors. If you were running in a partisan primary, you wouldn't knock on Republican doors as a Democrat. You'd knock on Democratic doors, and the only people you'd be listening to are the people that agree with your thoughts. And the same thing happens when you're a Republican. But when you have to do the opposite, and people chew you out. By the way, I've been chewed out a lot as a councilman and mayor by people who didn't agree with what I was thinking. And I always knew I had to listen. because they had a right to have a say over me and my future and whether or not I was going to win. And listening is really key to good public policy. The best public policy. I think the Democratic Party does a lot of wonderful things. One of the wonderful things they do is they focus on people programs. Republicans, they tend to focus on the human spirit and how we can engage more and help entrepreneurs and people who create. I don't see either one of those as being bad. I think there's something great that you can draw from each one of them. But that's not what's happening in the system today.
Okay, let's go to our audience here. We have a couple of questions in the back there. Yes, sir.
Bill, I heard you say that money is speech. And I understand that, you know, it's about freedom of speech and so forth, but what that also says is that if you don't have money, you don't have the freedom to speak. And that seems to be a huge problem. And so I'm really basically asking both of you, how do you solve that? How do you give the voice of the person that doesn't have the money equality with the one who does?
Bill, we'll let you go first on this one.
Well, you know, I'm saying what the Supreme Court said. You know, a lot of other countries have different systems. There are countries, for instance, that say that when TV stations, radio stations using the public airwaves, that they provide a certain amount of free time to political candidates to get views out, where they don't need a lot of money to buy it. You could have actually have newspapers or certain media resources that would help get information out to people. The real question is, how do people get information? How do you get real discussions on issues? And we don't get that now. I agree. If you look at the debates you see on television, who runs the debates? Well, a little corporation runs this one. Fox News runs it, so they have their person ask questions. The next person does it. They have their little person. Everything is kind of structured. So it is very difficult. You need to get information out. But Paul, when you have to run against, you know, like in an open primary, if everybody you have to get that message to in the primary, it inherently costs more. It takes more money, and it's easier to rig the system.
Paul, yeah.
Two things to try to answer your question. The first one on the money question. We've had some really smart people looking at our initiative that deals with the dark money effort, Terry Goddard, Grant Woods, others. Terry, by the way, has been kind of the real leader on that one. And what they've told me, they're lawyers, I'm not, but they have told me that what the courts have allowed is the ability to deal with disclosure. Our ability to limit the amount of money that goes in is probably unconstitutional, and our effort doesn't do that. But they pointed out that Anton Scalia actually made comments on the record saying that disclosure was legal. Disclosure was something that you could do. Our effort does that, and it requires that you take that back to the original source. Now, disclosing that money, I think, is an important part of the answer to your question. And the other part that I would tell you is opening it up to more people, opening the system up to more people. How many people, any independents in the room? Raise your hand if you're an independent. Okay, so I'm just going to tell all of you something. If any of you decide to run for governor, let me give you a little secret. If you run as a Democrat, you need 7,000 signatures. If you run as a Republican, you need 7,000 signatures. But for any of you, if you decide to run for governor that are independents, you need 34,000 signatures. By the way, if you're independents, and you go in and you apply for an early ballot, just like Republicans or Democrats do, every year you have to renew it to vote in the primary. You don't have to do that if you're a Democrat or Republican. It's by design. They don't want you. They want to narrow the amount of people that can have a say on them. Because what that does for the special interests in those parties is it dramatically increases their power. To me, expand it to more people and disclose the money that's being given out, and that's going to give us the best way to give a broader voice to more people.
Okay. We have some questioners lining up back there. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thanks to all three of you for being here. And I have a question that's not exactly along the lines. I'd like to ask a question of the moderator, Jim. And since you're the moderator,
I'm just moderating. I'm not answering questions today. I did enough of that.
The question is, I think everybody agrees that politics appear polarized and, radical on one side and another and so forth. And I want to ask Jim, and you have, quite an extensive career in politics and history and so forth. I want to ask your opinion as to just how polarized they are now. And the reason I'm asking that is I have, and I'm sure most of us have read articles or seen political cartoons going all the way back to the revolutionary times. And the politicians were at each other's throats, and they were accusing each other of, hiring prostitutes and stuff like that. And that has kind of gone on almost throughout the American history. So I'd like to ask Jim, in your opinion, is it that much different today compared to maybe when you first got in politics?
Well, I'm not supposed to be answering the questions here today, but I will just tell you, and by the way, I have a kind of a 50-minute lecture on this topic here, so invite me back sometime. I'll shorten it down to the Rotary length of time here. But it is and it isn't. In some ways, it's no worse than it was before. Probably one of the most violent eras in our political history was the decade before the Civil War, when people were carrying guns onto the floor of the House and the Senate. There was the famous beating of Senator Sumner until he was unconscious and brain damaged he was beaten by a member of Congress from South Carolina. Of course, the end of that was the Civil War. It took millions of lives, but let's hope that's not what we're headed here today. But you're absolutely right, political campaigns have been scurrilous throughout our history. What I think is different today is the ability, once the members are elected, or what I was talking now from the standpoint of the Congress, and I think it's basically true in legislatures too. From the standpoint of the members of Congress, the ability to work together to cross party lines is much less, people are doing it much less than they were before. And there's a number of reasons why I think this lack of civility has broken down, and sometime I'd love to come and talk about that, but I think we do have much less civility than we had before, and I think the ability to find solutions, people reaching out across party lines to find solutions has been thwarted and has come to an end in large measure. So I think in many ways, I think we are at a rather perilous time in our political history. Yes, I would say we are.
Thomas Jefferson one time said that what works is infinitesimally better than what doesn't. As we look at, when Paul's city was voted the best run city in the world, Tucson wasn't in second place. And those of us that have lived in both places have seen that. The city of Phoenix functions a whole lot better than the city of Tucson does, and it functions as a city manager form of government rather than as a political form of government, even though we call ours a city manager form of government. And I think when you have 40% of the registered voters in this state being independents, we've got to get more people involved. And I think all we have to do, we don't like to look at Phoenix as an example, but they're run a whole lot better than we are. And I believe it's because a lot more people are involved in their election process and how many people participate. And I'd like to have your comments on that.
Okay, great comment. I'm not sure there was a real question there, but each want to comment on that? I'll put it into kind of a question. Do you think Phoenix does run better because of the kind of system it has, or not? Bill, you go first.
Yeah, I have no idea.
No idea.
But what, in terms of the proposal for top two primaries, the group that has been hurt through experience, at least in California, has been independents. It's been much more difficult for them to get on the ballot and go through. So I don't think the proposals that we're dealing with will help any of the problem that he's talking about, to the extent that it's a problem. But I'll certainly defer to the ex-mayor of Phoenix to tell us what a great system they have.
Before you completely answer that question, Paul, would you respond to the comments that were made earlier by Bill about this study in California? And
Sure.
Is it true?
I know the studies. By the way, you can get a copy of the California study done by the Open Primaries group. I will tell you, in California, Democrats did not like the open primary. Why? Well, because they were in control of the state. They had the control of it. Labor unions did not like it. They have lots of studies coming out of labor unions and the social scientists that work with them that tell you it's a really bad deal because they'd like it to go back, right? The group in power almost always hates this change. But if you go to Nebraska and you talk to them, and by the way, the elections in California went from being the least competitive in the country to the most competitive in the country. Also in Nebraska, you find these strange coalitions. I'm just going to give you one bill that passed there. They passed a bill with Republicans and Democrats that gave prenatal care to illegal immigrants for free. All right, passed through a Republican legislature. Why? By the way, Right to Life and Planned Parenthood both sponsored the bill. All right, it was vetoed by the governor. Because the governor knew that with illegals, you did not want to be taking that position in a Republican primary. You can't win with that. But the Republicans in the legislature did, the leadership did. Why? Because they can go talk to Democratic votes too, and independent votes too. All right, all of a sudden, finding those answers, the whole paradigm shifts. It does in city politics. Now, I wouldn't even think about telling you Phoenix is better run than Tucson, right? So that's not gonna happen. But here's what I will tell you. As mayor, as a council person, it just seemed obvious to me that if I wanted to support education, I needed business to work. I get the Democratic Party, they always hate money and moneyed and corporate interests. Well, let me tell you what I saw. It was the money interest, the corporate interest, the businesses that could thrive, that gave us money to pay for better neighborhood programs and more cops and better education. These things aren't disconnected. They're tied together. We may not like the guy sitting at the other end of the rowboat, but I'm going to tell you a little secret. If they sink, we're going to sink with them. We're tied together. I thought that was common sense until I ran for governor. Right? And then I recognized there's two sides, and you need to pick a side. And here's my answer to you. Baloney. Baloney, there are two sides. We're all one people, e pluribus unum. That used to mean something. Our ability to come together, to find common ground, we can do it. But this system that we have, which by the way our founders did not like, it's not purporting that, it's not supporting that and its ability to work.
Okay, we're gonna take one last, this is gonna be our last question back there.
The discussion today focuses on free speech, on open primaries. Isn't the key issue really transparency? That's an overutilized word, but here we are as the public, as taxpayers, responsible for making laws work, electing people. What about true transparency? And in particular, all the money that we're talking about. Why not disclosure, full disclosure of where, when, why?
Okay, Paul, you go first and Bill will get the last word.
I will make mine really short. We totally disclosed where we've raised our money from. By the way, we raised national money. There was a question as to why. I can tell you why. 4 years ago, when we ran this effort, there was $122 million that flowed into a 501c4. About $2 million of it was spent against the open primary. We don't necessarily know who put that money in, although there's strong suspicion it was the Koch brothers. What was clear to me was that when you run this type of effort, that there can be a lot of pressure by the establishment to stop funding on a local level, even from people who are high net worth people that agree with you. We went out of state. We now have an effort nationally, not just in Arizona. John is heading up an effort nationally to do this in other states. And there are some high net worth people who are really worried about our Congress. They're patriots. They believe, conservatives and liberals that believe we have to get people who don't agree with one another to talk to one another again. Now, we've disclosed that. We've been transparent. We already have opposition. It's already being paid for, but you won't know who it is. You're not going to be told who it is. Yes, transparency matters. We think, we believe, and again, I'm not a legal scholar. I'm a business guy at the end of the day. I'm a guy who was mayor of the city of Phoenix. I can't tell you legally whether what we're promoting is constitutional. I can tell you that some really smart legal minds in the state have said that what we're doing is legal and is constitutional.
Okay, last word, Bill.
Yeah, well, I totally agree that transparency would be a great thing if you can get it. But if you look at the last national election, I forget that guy that was Bush's brain that went out and raised, you know, Carl Rove, yeah. He was working for issue groups. And the issue groups that they would raise money for and affect campaigns and put all that kind of money out didn't have to make these disclosures because they didn't say vote for Joe Blow or vote for somebody else. All I'm telling you is the money has a lot of ways to get around this sort of stuff. And I hope somebody can come up with a plan to affect that. That would be wonderful. But the top two primary plan enhances the effects of money and takes away from one of the ways we have for candidates to get their message out that doesn't take a lot of money. So those things, it's strange that they're together, which makes a suspicious mind suspicious. But definitely money disclosure, if it can be done right, is great. Top two, very, very bad idea because it enhances the ability of money.
Great, thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking our two participants. I think it's been a great discussion. We're going to hear a lot more of this during this coming election. Paul has asked me to let you know that there are some forms on the back of the table there. If you want more information about open primaries as this campaign proceeds, you can take one of these and send it to them or fill it out here. And again, thank you all. You've been a great audience and great questions. And I hope it's been a good discussion and somewhat enlightening for you. Thank you all very much.
We thank Jim, Bill, and Paul for their presentation. We're going to do that by placing a book in our Make Way for Books library called Mix It Up, that they have all autographed.